Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tracing a really complex journey. It's about the Vietnamese diaspora, often called Viet Kieu, and their changing relationship with Vietnam itself. We're going to dive into some pretty significant recent shifts in Vietnamese law, especially around dual citizenship. And we want to unpack what these changes actually mean for this huge global community. Our mission really is to explore how these legal updates might, attract talent back home, but also, and this is crucial, to dig into the very intricate political and cultural feelings across different generations within the diaspora. It's definitely not a simple story.
No, not at all. And we're talking about a massive population globally. These Viet Kieu communities, they're substantial in the U.S., France, Canada, Australia, loads of places. They have deep historical roots, obviously, and their contributions, well, they've been huge, both in their host countries and back in Vietnam, economically, culturally, politically. Understanding their dynamic with the homeland is absolutely key if you want to grasp where Vietnam might be heading.
Right. So the big news, the thing everyone's talking about, is this major new law. It kicks in July 1st, 2025. Essentially, Vietnam is now letting Viet Kieu regain Vietnamese citizenship while keeping their current nationality. How much does this really change things, do you think? Is it a genuine game changer for people considering going back, or maybe more symbolic right now?
Oh, I think it's definitely more than symbolic. It's quite a profound shift, really. This new law, it removes some pretty significant hurdles that made dual citizenship incredibly tough before.
Yeah.
Basically impossible for many. Things like the language requirement, that's suspended. And the rule about having to live there for 5 years before you could even apply, that's gone too, along with other administrative barriers. The key thing here, I think, is that Vietnam isn't just looking for investment anymore. It feels like they're actively trying to mend some historical divides, offering a clearer, more direct path back to citizenship itself. It's about leveraging human capital, not just financial.
That makes sense. And it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere, does it? It seems like it builds on earlier efforts. I remember reading about a 2015 policy, something about a certificate granting overseas Vietnamese basically the same rights as locals. That was aimed squarely at getting investment from the diaspora, right?
Exactly. That was very much focused on economic rights, facilitating business.
So this new law seems like the next logical step then, addressing citizenship directly, not just, equivalent rights. So for you listening in, it makes you wonder, how might these big legal changes really affect the Vietnamese diaspora, especially those actually thinking about returning?
Well, the official reasons behind the changes are pretty clear. Vietnam's economy has been growing impressively, it's more stable, and that is genuinely making more enacts. Overseas Vietnamese think about coming back. You hear about strong personal reasons, professional opportunities, and definitely sentimental ties pulling people back. Many see real chances to contribute and also, frankly, to benefit from the fast development there.
Yeah, and there was that idea we came across from an academic suggesting that Vietnamese talent abroad will return if they can contribute to major causes. That really sums up the government's hope, doesn't it? Tapping into that skilled diaspora pool. But what about the practical side? Do our sources suggest this vision is actually matching up with the reality people face on the ground?
That's the hope, absolutely. But the sources also show that even with easier citizenship, it's not always straightforward. Take academics, for instance. Professors at top Western universities, right? Recognized globally for research, leadership. But they might land in Vietnam and find they don't qualify for the same title. Why? Because of local requirements about specific teaching hours, for example.
So a mismatch in what's valued, research versus teaching metrics.
Precisely. It highlights a kind of clash in academic culture. Someone prized for groundbreaking research in the West might hit a bureaucratic wall in Vietnam over teaching loads, which, ironically, could put off the very intellectual stars Vietnam says it wants to attract.
And it's not just about job titles either, is it? It seems like even with government pushes for remittances and investment, many overseas Vietnamese in surveys didn't see those official channels as that important. Or they just weren't sure how to use them.
Yeah, that's right.
Their main motivation often wasn't some grand national project, but just helping out family and friends, their personal connections. That really suggests a gap, doesn't it, between the policy goal and how the diaspora actually engages.
It does, and that gap often links back to these deeper generational divides within the diaspora itself. It's fascinating.
If you look at the older generation, let's say roughly those under 65 now, who were old enough to remember the Republic of Vietnam, the RVN, before 75 or came over as refugees right after, their political views are, well, quite distinct.
Yeah, our sources really highlighted that, a very strong anti-communist feeling and this deep, almost nostalgic longing for the South Vietnam they lost. You see it really powerfully in things like Black April commemorations. That marks the fall of Saigon for them, a huge symbolic loss of the RVN.
That love for the RVN and the shared commitment to anti-communism really became a cornerstone of the community identity for many, and the yellow flag of South Vietnam overwhelmingly favored as their symbol. It's a really potent emotional anchor.
Right. Now, contrast that with the newer generations.
Yeah.
People under 50, maybe born outside Vietnam, or younger refugees, first-gen kids growing up after the war. They often have, a less traditional way of thinking, is how one source put it. A lot of that comes from assimilation into American or other Western cultures where, youth voices tend to be valued maybe a bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
For them, some of those older symbols, they just carry different weight, or sometimes, frankly, less weight altogether.
This is where those generational differences really leap out, isn't it? Like that quote from Mallory P. saying the flag issue is about holding on to conflicts that are long buried,
Yeah,
that has no relevance anymore to our real one of today.
powerful words.
Yeah. And suggesting it needs to be dropped if the Vietnamese community wants to be relevant to the new generation.
Hmm.
It implies that for many younger people, those symbols of past fights just don't define their current lives or what they want for the community's future. We also saw interesting political shifts, like that example of a second-gen Vietnamese American family, originally Democrats, who shifted to supporting Trump.
Right.
It shows a kind of political diversity that maybe doesn't fit neatly into that older, single narrative of anti-communism being the only driver.
Exactly. And younger generations might define themselves specifically as Vietnamese American.
Mm.
It's about, as one source said, claiming the space of being not quite American and not quite Vietnamese.
Yeah.
It's not a gray area of disbelonging, but a place of its own.
So creating a unique identity, not stuck between two worlds, but defining a new space.
Precisely. They see it as forging this unique hybrid identity, a third space. And you see it in other places too, like younger Vietnamese Canadians talking about wanting to express their culture online and offline. But interestingly, less focused on pinning down exactly what that culture is, more about the expression itself.
And their activism looks different too, right?
Right.
Their focus often shifts to current issues inside Vietnam, things like the environment, China's influence, documenting police abuse.
Mm-hmm. Using social media a lot for that.
Yeah, using social media to organize, raise awareness. There was even that nationalist slogan, HSTSVN, standing for Ho Hung Sa, Tring Sa, Vietnam, about sovereignty over the islands.
With aircells and Spratleys.
Exactly. But it gained traction without needing to explicitly reference the Communist Party. It's a different kind of patriotism focused on current national interests, territorial integrity.
It suggests, as one analysis put it, that the old archetypes no longer apply. Younger generations seem more willing to see cultural stuff as, social commentary, maybe satire, or just starting a conversation. Not necessarily a rigid political statement like the older generation might.
Okay, so given all these complex layers, shifting identities, different priorities, the big question comes back. Would these newer generations, with all these dynamics, actually return to work and live in Vietnam long term, even with the new law?
Well, on the face of it, there were definitely things pulling them back. The sources mentioned the obvious ones: personal, professional, and sentimental reasons. We talked about those. There's also this interesting perception noted in some studies that locals tended to regard overseas Vietnamese with more respect and saw them as more deeply connected to the culture somehow.
That's interesting. A kind of perceived authenticity.
Perhaps, and also the feeling that they might actually feel more similar to locals in urban Vietnam than they do to people in Europe or North America.
A sense of fitting in better, maybe?
Could be. Plus, of course, the potential for business, buying property, especially if you're financially secure, those are real draws.
Okay, but then there are the significant hurdles, the realities that might push people away. Quality of life is a big one we saw mentioned. Worries about the rat race being even worse than back home.
Yeah, pollution too.
Severe air pollution, awful traffic, the intense heat. Those practical things matter day to day.
Definitely. And work-life balance. Apparently, it is not really that much easier than in the U.S., for example. High-paying office jobs might expect you to be on call, working unpaid weekends. Not exactly the relaxed lifestyle some might imagine.
And then, the really big one, the political and human rights climate. This seems crucial. The Communist Party, the CPV, is still the only legal party. No opposition allowed.
That's right. That hasn't changed.
And our sources paint a pretty grim picture regarding freedom of speech and expression. Things like constant surveillance and stalking of dissidents. No major protests allowed. Vietnam being ranked as the third largest jailer of journalists in the world. Reporters facing restrictions, harassment, even physical attacks for covering sensitive stuff.
It's a tough environment for free expression.
Yeah, government monitoring communications, expecting self-censorship, and deploying this army of online trolls and cyber troops, Force 47, they're sometimes called, to spread disinformation, run hate campaigns against activists and critics.
We saw reports of online commentators facing harassment, crackdown, and arrests just for criticizing government policy, even things like the COVID-19 response.
So that creates a real dilemma, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. What you see is this powerful economic engine pulling one way, but the political controls remain very tight. And this leads to a really stark warning we found in the sources. If you manifest your freedom of speech in Vietnam using a Vietnam passport, you're going to be in big trouble.
Wow, so dual citizenship might get you in the door, but it doesn't necessarily shield you if you speak out.
That seems to be the implication. It doesn't guarantee protection against state authority if you exercise freedoms you're used to in the West. That tension between the economic opening and the persistent authoritarian political system, that remains a massive factor for diaspora members weighing a permanent return.
What a complex picture our sources have really laid out for us today. You've got Vietnam opening the door wider with these citizenship laws, actively inviting people back. But the diaspora itself is navigating these evolving identities, the generational shifts, and staring hard at the practical and, crucially, the political realities on the ground.
Indeed. It really reminds you that beneath all the policy changes and economic figures, there are these deeply human stories. Stories of identity, connection, belonging, and the ongoing search for freedom, playing out in really complex and often unexpected ways.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the really nuanced world of the Vietnamese diaspora and its intricate ties to the homeland. We hope it's given you, our listener, plenty to think about.